All right. So up to this point, we've been talking about basically using HTTP to be able to retrieve, to send data and whatnot, and we haven't really talked about this over here, right? The syntax of this URL. This URL here, right? Up to this point, it's been some arbitrary string, and as long as whoever is invoking these URLs, as long as they follow that URL, it would execute your function. Yes, and I kind of joked earlier that this message here, and hello Alice, the URL is just hello and Alice, so it's hello name. Here I joked that the URL was find user by ID, right? So it looks like it could be anything, right? The URL is whatever you want, right? As long as you're consistent, right? And you know which URL you need to hit. Yes. Well, it turns out that we don't want to be as lenient as that, right? We want to provide a standard, right? A standard where we can all agree on what does that URL look like and how it should be interpreted. Okay, and REST, meaning representational state transfer, is an architectural convention, right? That has become standard, pretty standard across the industry, right? So if you go out there, in any one of your jobs, chances are that they will be using some kind of RESTful service, right? And that means that they're following some rules, right? That they're not just it's not just anything. So here's a couple of the rules, right? So for instance, and this only applies to HTTP, right? RESTful service is not necessarily just only applied to HTTP. It could be any other protocol, right? But here, if you're using HTTP, then these are the rules. So if you're going to create something, then your HTTP service should accept a post. If you're going to read or retrieve data from the server, then you should be accepting a GET, right? If you are going to update something, meaning a record in the database that already exists, then you should be accepting a PUT, right? If you're going to remove a record that already exists in the database, you should be accepting a delete. Okay, that's easy enough, right? Also, if the rules also apply based on the structure of your data, right? So whatever UML diagram, class diagram, or tables, and how they're referencing each other with foreign keys and primary keys, right? That also is captured in the syntax of your URL, the structure of your URL. So let's take a look at this really simple example of A having a primary key, and then B having a foreign key back to A, and then C having back a foreign key back to B, and then D having a foreign key back to C. Yes? All right. Let's not ignore the fact that this is a composition, right? Let's not consider that just yet. Right? So if this is a UML class diagram, let's look at some of the rules or some of the constraints that RESTful services must follow, right, to be referred to as a RESTful service. Okay. Right. So one of the things is that, for instance, if you want to create a new instance of A, right, then your URL would end with /A, right, where A would be some noun, right, some noun that is usually the name of the class or the name of the table that you are interacting with, right? So if this is employees, then it would be /employees, right, plural, right? So this might be a misnomer, because if we're using a class diagrams typically are singular, right? So that A usually is a noun, but it's singular, right? So here I guess I should update my slides, and the RESTful services suggest that all these would be nouns. So A is a noun, right, and it would be in the plural. Okay, so this would be post employees. So create a new entity or new record of type A, and the data is in the HTTP body, right, either as XML or JSON or whatever it is that you agree on. So the RESTful service doesn't say anything about the content of the data or how the data should be interpreted. That's up to you. If you rather have XML or JSON or whatever, or tab delimited data, that's up to you how you interpret that data. If you're retrieving, if you're saying get/noun, then that means retrieve all the instances of that entity of type A, as an array, or some collection, right? Whereas if you specify an ID, a particular primary key, a value for a primary key, then that means that you're retrieving a single instance of that object, right? Whose ID is 1, 2, 3. So presumably this is a record, and we're using this would be exclusively a primary key. It would be exclusively a primary key, right? So this would be nouns and then the primary key. If you're going to update a record that already exists, right, then it would be noun followed by the primary key of the record that you're updating, right? And the new data that you're updating would be as part of the body, right? And if you're deleting, it would be delete noun / and then the ID of the record that already exists that you are removing. Make sense? All right. Now, there's some additional rules that I'm not covering here. For instance, there's some additional suggestions is that APIs or these kinds of endpoints, right? They might have multiple versions, version 1, version 2, version 3. So to be able to maintain multiple versions of this API as it evolves over time, usually it's a good practice to prepend this with like a /v1 1.1 or whatever, right? That specifies the version of your web service API. Okay, I'm not covering that. Another good rule in the industry typically is that because these URLs sometimes could be mistaken or misinterpreted as URLs that are accessing static files on the file system, right? Which we're not, right? We're accessing data in a database, but because these might be misinterpreted, also a good practice often is to prepend your entire URL with either /API or /data or /REST or something we can all agree, right? That this is not accessing static content. This is accessing data in some database. Make sense? So that's also a very common rule of thumb. I'm not posting that here. All right, so that's if you're accessing a single table. What about multiple tables? Like for instance, from A to B. A to B has a one-to-many relationship. Let's take a look at that. Right. So if you have a relationship between A and B, right, then the nomenclature would be that if you want to create a new relationship between B and A, right, then you would post the parent, the ID of the record who's the parent, he's the primary key, and then the child, right? So you're creating a brand new instance of B whose foreign key, right, points to that parent. Make sense? Right? And if you're retrieving all the instances of B that belong to a particular parent, right, then you would say get, right, the parent's ID, right, and then the child. So this would be give me a create a in the college, in the computer science college, right, this new student, right, so that would create a relationship that said the student points to whatever college they belong to, right? Or you can say, for this particular college, give me all the students, right? So we retrieve only those students that are in that particular department or college or whatnot. Make sense? Right? Now you can continue this a little further and say, well, yes, I want to create a relationship between B and A, right? And I want to retrieve a particular instance of B, but B belongs to A. Yes. But this is a little bit redundant. This is a little bit redundant because already 2, 3, 4, the primary key of B already makes that record unique enough. Right? There's no point of having to join it with the parent. You could just provide the ID of that particular record, so you could say just B234. There's no need to prepend it and give it a context that it belongs to a particular parent, right? So this is acceptable. to do it this way. If you already know the primary key of what you're retrieving, right? All right, so let's take a look and code an example.